She stopped mid-bite, her fork trembling as the boy's voice cut through the hum of the restaurant. "Please don't leave me." It was a chilly November evening. The city's upscale restaurant buzzed with clinking glasses and soft murmurs. My wife, Sarah, and I were out celebrating her birthday. She looked stunning in her emerald green dress, her smile as warm as the candlelight on our table. Then came the boy. He was maybe 10, no older. His clothes hung loose, patched and frayed, and his shoes had holes that showed his socks. He didn't belong in a place like this, not with the polished floors and diners in suits. The maitre d' tried to block him at the door, but he slipped past, weaving between the tables with an urgency that turned heads. He stopped in front of our table. "Please," he said again, tears brimming in his eyes. "Please, don't leave me." The words struck like a thunderclap. Sarah froze, staring at him like she'd seen a ghost. "What's going on?" I whispered, confused, and already reaching for my wallet. "I'll call someone." But she didn't respond to me. Her hand went to her chest, trembling. What did you say?" she asked him, her voice barely audible. The boy wiped his nose with his sleeve. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, glancing nervously at the maitre d', who was quickly approaching. "But you look like her. You look like my mom." It wasn't the kind of resemblance you'd see in a photograph, more like a flicker in his eyes, the way they searched hers. His words were messy, rushed. "She had your hair and your smile. She told me she'd come back, but she never did. Please, don't leave me too." By now, people were staring. The maitre d' grabbed the boy's arm. "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am. We'll escort him out." "No," Sarah snapped, louder than I'd ever heard her. She stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "Let him go." The maitre d' released the boy, startled, as Sarah knelt in front of him. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Marcus," he whispered. "Where's your mom, Marcus?" "She died," he said. Sarah's face fell. She took a shaky breath. "And your dad?" "Never met him." He didn't cry as he said it. He just looked at her, his small hands clenching and unclenching, as though he was trying to hold himself together. "Who's taking care of you?" she asked. "Orphanage," he muttered. "But they don't care about me." I ran away. The room was dead silent. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares. I didn't know what to do or say, but Sarah did. She reached out and pulled Marcus into a hug. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. That night, everything changed. We took him home, much to the shock of the restaurant staff. Sarah couldn't stop crying on the drive. She told me later that his words reminded her of something from her past, something she'd never told me before. When she was 6, her mom left her at a bus stop with nothing but a promise she'd come back. Hours turned into days, but no one came. Eventually, a kind stranger called Child Services, and Sarah spent years bouncing between foster homes before aging out of the system. She swore, if she ever had the chance, she'd never let a child feel that same pain. Marcus wasn't just a chance, he was a second chance. The process wasn't easy, adoption never is. There were home visits, legal hurdles, and more paperwork than I thought possible. But Sarah fought for him with everything she had. 6 months later, Marcus officially became our son. Now, every November, we celebrate not just Sarah's birthday, but the day Marcus walked into that restaurant and into our lives. It's not perfect parenting, never is, but it's ours. Sometimes when Marcus hugs her tightly, I catch Sarah whispering those same 4 words back to him. "Please don't leave me." He never will. The months that followed that November night were a whirlwind of emotions, challenges, and hope. Marcus brought light into our lives, but his story wasn't a fairy tale, it was raw and real. And so were his scars. The first night he slept under our roof, he woke up screaming. Sarah and I ran to his room to find him curled in the corner, clutching a threadbare teddy bear he'd somehow hidden in his small backpack. He didn't explain, and we didn't push him. But later, after Sarah calmed him and he drifted back to sleep, she shared her fears with me. "He doesn't trust this," she said, running her fingers through his tangled hair. "He doesn't trust us. Why would he? Nobody's stayed before." And so we worked, little by little, to earn that trust. Marcus was quiet at first, and understandably so. He ate quickly, almost defensively, as if he'd have to fight for his next meal. He refused to unpack his small bag, keeping it by his side everywhere he went, ready to leave at any moment. He hardly smiled. "It broke my heart." Sarah said it broke hers too. But instead of letting the pain paralyze her, It ignited something in Hera fire I hadn't seen before. Every morning, she'd wake up early to pack his lunches, even though he hadn't started school yet. She left notes inside. Simple things like, "We're glad you're here," or "You're not alone." At first, Marcus barely noticed them, but one day, I caught him tracing the words with his finger, his lips moving silently as he read. That was the turning point. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't a straight line. But slowly, Marcus began to open up. He told us bits and pieces about the orphanage, how he never felt safe there, how the other boys teased him about missing parents, how he used to dream about his mom coming back but eventually stopped, because even dreams can be cruel when they only lie. Sarah listened to every word, never interrupting, never rushing him. She told him stories from her childhood too, about the nights she cried herself to sleep in strange houses, wondering what she'd done to deserve it. It was their shared pain that bonded them. But more than that, it was their shared determination to build something new together. One day, Marcus surprised us. He came downstairs holding that old teddy bear and said, "Can we wash him? He smells funny." Sarah smiled so wide I thought her face might crack. "Of course, sweetheart." Later that night, I found the bear hanging to dry next to the rest of our laundry, its once matted fur now fluffy and clean. Marcus tucked it into bed with him that night, but this time, he wasn't clutching it like a lifeline. He was holding it like a memory, something he didn't need to fear losing anymore. Months turned into a year, and Marcus became someone new. He laughed more, played more, and even argued with us like any other 10-year-old might. But beneath it all, he carried the wisdom of someone far older, someone who'd lived through more heartbreak than most adults. When he started school, he struggled. Other kids didn't understand him, and he didn't know how to let them in. But Sarah, always the fighter, joined every parent-teacher meeting, read every book on helping adopted children adjust, and even volunteered at the school to stay close. One day, Marcus came home with a crumpled piece of paper. It was a drawing of 3 stick figures, one tall with long hair, one taller with short hair, and one small with curly hair. All 3 held hands, standing in front of a little house with a sun shining above. He handed it to Sarah. "It's us," he said shyly. "Our family." She framed that picture. It still hangs in the living room, next to our wedding photo. Now, 3 years later, Marcus doesn't flinch when someone hugs him. He doesn't ask if we're going to leave when he makes a mistake. He calls us Mom and Dad without hesitation, like the words have always belonged to him. Every time I see him and Sarah together, whether they're baking cookies or reading on the couch, I'm reminded of that night in the restaurant. That boy, scared and vulnerable, shouted 4 words that saved his life, and in the process, he saved ours too. As the years went by, Marcus kept growing not just physically but in his confidence and heart. By the time he turned 13, he had already taught us more about resilience than any book or life experience ever could. But life still had its challenges. Being a black boy in a predominantly white community wasn't easy. There were moments when his face fell after school, moments he didn't want to talk about. One night at dinner, he finally did. "They called me." "Poor boy," he muttered, shoving his mashed potatoes around his plate. "Said I didn't belong at the table during lunch." My fork hit my plate, anger surging in my chest. But before I could speak, Sarah leaned forward. "Marcus," she said softly, "I know their words hurt, but let me tell you something." She reached across the table and took his hand, her voice steady. "They don't decide where you belong. You belong here. You belong everywhere your heart takes you. Don't let them steal your light." He didn't respond immediately, but the way his shoulders eased told me he was listening, and over time, we saw him stand taller. His world expanded as he made new friends, tried basketball even though he hated running, and discovered his love for art. By the time Marcus was 15, he was painting everything he could get his hands on. Canvases, old wood scraps, even walls in our garage. His art was bold, vibrant, and unapologetically him. One day, Sarah suggested he enter one of his pieces in the community art fair. "I'm not good enough," he mumbled, his confidence cracking. Sarah crouched down to his level, holding his face in her hands. "Marcus," she said, her voice firm, "do you remember that little boy in the restaurant who said, 'Please, don't leave me'?" He nodded, his eyes glistening. "You saved yourself that night," she said. "You chose to be seen, to be heard. That took courage. So don't you dare let fear stop you now. Marcus entered the competition, and though he didn't win first place, he won something bigger. Pride in himself. Hey there. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit subscribe to join me for more powerful real-life stories that spark change and inspire strength. Together, we can explore stories of resilience, justice, and the moments that make a difference. Your support helps amplify voices that need to be heard, so let's grow this community of changemakers. Click subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together. The judges gave him a special commendation for a piece he called Roots and Wings, a bold painting of a tree whose branches stretched to the stars, its roots intertwining with figures who held it steady. That painting now hangs in the hallway at his high school, a testament to who he is and where he's come from. By the time he was 17, Marcus was no longer just our boy. He was his own person, full of dreams and drive. He talked about going to art school, maybe even starting his own studio one day. We supported him every step of the way. But there was one moment that truly brought everything full circle. It happened during his senior year. The school was hosting a family night, and Marcus had been chosen to give a speech as class president. Standing on the stage in front of hundreds of parents, he looked small at first, almost like the boy who once ran into that restaurant. But then he cleared his throat, his voice steady and sure. "My life didn't start easy," he began, his eyes scanning the room. "I've been in places where it felt like nobody cared if I stayed or disappeared. But one night, I found people who did. My parents didn't just take me in. They showed me how to take a chance on myself." I felt my throat tighten as he smiled at us from the stage. "They taught me that family isn't just about where you come from. It's about who shows up for you, day after day, no matter how hard it gets. I wouldn't be here without them." The applause was deafening. Sarah had tears streaming down her face, and I wasn't far behind. After the event, as we were walking to the car, Marcus stopped and turned to Sarah. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "thank you for not giving up on me." She pulled him into a tight hug. "Thank you for letting us in." That night, Marcus didn't just solidify his place in our lives. He reminded us of the power of love, resilience, and choice. He chose us that night in the restaurant, and every day since then, we've chosen him. Now Marcus is 21, studying art in college, and thriving in ways we only dreamed for him. Every holiday, he still comes home, still hugs Sarah like the world might fall apart if he doesn't. And every time, she whispers those same words he said to her years ago: "Please, don't leave me." Neither of them ever will. Marcus's journey through college was everything we hoped it would be and more. His art blossomed in ways none of us had imagined. He spent long nights working in the studio, experimenting with new techniques and pushing himself to tell stories through his work. One day during his second year, Marcus called Sarah while I was at work. She later told me she had answered with her usual cheerful, "Hey, sweetheart," but stopped short when she heard his voice crack. "Mom," he said softly, "I made it into the gallery show. They're going to display my work." By the time Sarah finished crying tears of joy, Marcus had explained that his piece, titled "The Table," would be part of a showcase featuring emerging black artists. It was inspired by that pivotal lunchroom memory when he'd been told he didn't belong. We flew out to see it, of course. The gallery was packed, with people murmuring admiration for every piece. But when we reached Marcus's corner, I saw why his work stood out. The painting was striking, a long table filled with vibrant, diverse figures, each one unique, each one radiant. At the head of the table was a boy's mall, alone at first glance, but with a bright golden light connecting him to everyone else in the scene. It was a masterpiece. As we stood in awe, a woman approached. She wore a sleek black dress and carried herself with an air of importance. "Is this your work?" she asked Marcus. He nodded nervously. "You have a remarkable gift," she said, handing him a business card. "Let's talk. I represent artists like you." That moment marked the beginning of something huge. Over the next few years, Marcus's career took off. He hosted his first solo exhibition at 23, titled "Belonging." It was a deeply personal collection, each piece a reflection of his journey from loneliness to connection. Sarah and I were there for the opening night, bursting with pride. But Marcus, being Marcus, he didn't just bask in his success. He used his platform to mentor kids who reminded him of his younger self, kids from orphanages, group homes, or tough backgrounds who thought their dreams didn't matter. He started hosting free art workshops on weekends. his warm smile and patient demeanor putting even the most skeptical kids at ease. When asked why he spent so much time giving back, he simply said, "Because someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." At 25, Marcus returned to the city where our story began. He had a vision to open a community art center for underprivileged youth. He called it the Golden Table, after his painting. The opening night was a blend of bittersweet and triumphant. The walls of the center were adorned with artwork from local kids, and the hall buzzed with laughter and excitement. When Marcus stood up to speak, Sarah gripped my hand tightly. "This center isn't just about art," he said, looking out at the crowd. "It's about finding a place where you're seen, heard, and valued. I want every kid who walks through these doors to know they belong here no matter what anyone's ever told them." The applause was thunderous, but my eyes were on Marcus. He wasn't just the scared boy we met that November evening anymore. He was a man strong, kind, and determined to make the world brighter. Later that night, when the crowds had left, it was just the three of us. Sarah hugged Marcus tightly, her tears flowing freely. "You've changed so many lives," she whispered. He pulled back, smiling gently. "I just followed your example, Mom. You and Dad gave me the chance to dream again. Now, whenever I pass the Golden Table on my way to work, I see kids laughing, painting, and chasing dreams of their own. It's a legacy born of love, resilience, and the unshakable bond forged over one shared moment in a crowded restaurant. And every time I hear someone say that 4 little words can't change the world, I think of that night. Please, don't leave me." Those words changed everything for Marcus, for us, and for everyone lucky enough to meet him.